The Grandparent's House and the Mystery of the Candles, Part 1. Hello friends, the following story I'm going to tell you is about the daily life of a young man named Angel Reyes. I hope you don't ask me for many explanations since I don't have them, and of course I would like to have them. I would like to understand and make sense of all this chaos. God knows I've tried. My family is stubbornly boring. I don't mean that in a bad way. On the contrary, that absence of problems has had a very quiet life. We're not rich, but we've never lacked anything. We don't have luxurious vacations, but we can visit the family at least once a year. My parents have a happy marriage. There's not much to tell, and I thought for a long time that we all had such a life, all the family members. At least at the beginning of the year 2022, I realized that it wasn't so, and that this is where the mystery begins. It all started with a photography workshop. They made me choose someone from my family and take pictures of that character and his environment to try to capture the essence of his personality. Thinking of someone interesting, I asked my grandfather to take pictures of him. Although my grandparents were like us, extremely quiet, that house of more than 150 years was already a character. At least that's what I thought then. I took some pictures of my grandfather and it was time to eat. Grandma prepared chicken broth for me, and she was very happy that I visited them. Once as a child, I told her as a courtesy that the chicken broth was very good, and since then she thought it was my favorite dish. Whenever she knew I would visit, she'd prepare it for me. She's so cute. In the street, suddenly there was a scandal. A boy had tried to rob the house of an old man near the corner. I didn't count that all day that man's children were there. They chased him in front of the grandparents' house and were giving him a tremendous beating. My grandfather was a very sensible man. He went out to ask them to wait for the police. At the end of the day, there was always the doubt, he said. Maybe he stole because he likes easy money or because of real need. That's what he always told us. I wanted to leave, but my grandmother stopped me. She asked me to wait inside and she told me to go back into my grandmother's house. She asked me to wait inside and I had to go into the house, listening to the screams behind those huge wooden doors. The house looks more like a convent, an old hotel than a house, but it had always belonged to the family. From the main entrance that faces the street, there are two corridors, one on the left of the bedrooms and another to the right of the kitchen. Dining room and living room in the center, there was a door to the small central garden with a fountain with an angel that, since I could remember, has caused me a lot of fear. I decided to finally ignore the hustle and bustle and continue with the photo session. I approached the angel as always with some nervousness and took some pictures. The light at the moment was perfect, and suddenly in the background, out of focus, through the camera I saw someone passing towards my grandparents' bedrooms. I lowered the camera and saw nothing, but I decided to approach that side of the house, usually always closed for visitors. My grandparents, for some reason, always sleep in separate rooms, one door in front of the other. At the end of the hallway, and in the front of both doors, the entrance to a smaller cellar that I had never entered. I thought that maybe it was time to do it. By talks that I had heard, I understood that they kept some photographs and old things that at some point my mother used it as a study, and that among other things, they kept the things that the former inhabitants of that house were leaving over more than 100 years. When I approached the door, I didn't know how to explain it. I felt as if someone was calling me from inside, and at the same time as if someone was pushing me by the chest as if I could not come any closer. Angel, the sound of someone calling me and by my name, and my back froze my blood. Stunned, I only felt hands grab my shoulders, and I screamed before realizing that it was my grandmother. She'd never scolded me so much. She told me that he would not tell my parents. But even she had asked me to leave the house at that moment. She didn't make me chicken broth again in any of the other visits. That was what hurt me the most. At the end of the year, she died without having forgiven me. She died on December 30th, and on the 31st of December, while the families gathered to wait for another year coming, mine was also gathered, but for another reason. At my grandmother's wake, we talked with the cousins remembering Grandma, especially the five of us who were almost the same age. The five of us were going to college at the time, and in the middle of the memories, I told them for the first time about the conflict I had with Grandma. That invasion of her privacy, innocently on my part, cost me my relationship with her in the last months. Everyone agreed that it wasn't a big deal. And suddenly the voice of Lucia, a cousin that was about 12 years old that we thought was still asleep in her brother's lap, said something that would only complicate things. She said something that would only complicate what she thought, and she told us, by accident, she entered the interior of that room that remained permanently closed since she could remember. It was, according to what she told us, completely upholstered with religious figures, and in the center of the room there was a round table full of lighted candles. We didn't believe her. If our grandparents said something in particular, it was that they were not at all concerned about that kind of religious figures and didn't educate any of their children to the Catholic or Protestant religion, or in which they were educated by their families. We told them that surely she was confused and that she had imagined it or was making it up, but her answer was so clear. She said it even with her closed eyes that if she didn't wake up, well, you wouldn't believe me and go and see for yourselves. At that moment, the house was alone, and we weren't far from the house, about 3 or 4 blocks, so we decided to go and end the curiosity. We told our relatives that we were going to go buy something to eat and ask the grandfather if he needed something for his house. We walked at a hurried pace for some reason without making much noise. I felt hollow in my stomach. I felt like telling them that we better forget about it, that it wasn't worth it. I'm not sure if that night there's no light in the street or if everyone decided to spend New Year's Eve somewhere else, but the street was more deserted and darker than usual. We entered the house and turned on the light. The silence was such that I could hear the sound of the lights. Silence was so deafening I could hear the noise of the bulb. We nervously walked down the hallway to the bedroom. When I looked at that angel in the courtroom, it terrified me. This time I saw him looking directly at me. I don't know if it was the little lighting coming in and my nerves, but I could barely see his face. And instead of a smile, what I saw on his face was an expression of terror or anger, but his mouth was completely open, or at least it was what I could make out in the darkness of night. Suddenly we already were in front of the room with my 4 cousins, Edward, Brian, Lixel, and Daniel. I opened the door and we found the image Lucia had said minutes before. From floor to ceiling, the room was covered by religious images of all kinds. It wasn't necessary to look for the switch to turn the light on. It wasn't necessary to turn on the lights because of the candles that were around the full room that illuminated the sky blue background with paint. And it made us fully appreciate the images, even the most hidden ones. We realized that there were even Hindu images in the corner of the wall, and we all went around the room trying to find out what it meant, but while my cousins were arguing, I could only think of one of the candles that was about to be completely consumed. The wooden gate rang. Someone had come to the house. I ran out of the hallway from where I could see the entrance and patio. It was my grandfather. I ran to tell the others, and we ran out running on tiptoe, and we saw the light in the hallway turn on. My grandfather was a few meters away from us and about to see us. Lixon and Edward barely managed to enter my grandfather's room. Outside of Brian and Daniel, I had to enter my grandmother's room trying to close the door without making much of a noise. If she, my grandmother, who was all love, was so upset with me, I couldn't imagine what my grandfather would do if he realized we, with my other relatives, were watching over his wife. He had betrayed his trust. My grandfather's slow steps approached until he stood in front of the door to which I was glued trying to listen. Suddenly I thought it was likely that he'd come to the house for something of Grandma's or to enter her room to remember her or something like that. And I quickly jumped to the floor to get under the bed. I heard him open one of the other doors. When I was about to peek out and get out from under the bed, he came into the room. I could barely hide. I saw his feet walk towards the center of the room, and I saw him get on his knees. I thought he had seen me and that he'd peek under the bed and pull me out furious, but he just put his hand trying to get something out. He passed his hand very close to my face, and luckily he didn't touch me. When he touched a shoebox, he pulled it out and he left the room. He closed the door and I heard the steps in the hallway. I heard another door close and then he walked away. Minutes later, Brian came in for me and he had to hide under the candle table. He couldn't do anything else. He saw Grandpa came in with a candle. He lit it and left it there. Then he walked away. He lit it, left, and then when I went to see, I noticed the candle that was about to be consumed changed. The one I had concentrated on. There were 46 candles on the table, forming a figure that I couldn't describe. It wasn't something I'd seen before, but it was too precise to be a coincidence. Now that I even was more tormented with doubt, evidently we couldn't commit to it anybody, but what the hell did it mean that all of this was in the room? Because grandfather took the time to go to change the candle in the house in the middle of his wife's funeral. Because nobody, not even his last children, entered that room. They seemed to have no idea what took on with their grandparents to make it so forbidden in the last time. When, in March of this year, 2023, grandfather's health suddenly declined.